Ever since my daughter was in middle school, she gave me the nickname Podge. And ever since then, that's what my daughter calls me. That's what all of her friends call me. We were always super close, and I was really worried when she was going off to college that maybe we'd grow apart a little bit more. So I just sort of racked my brain. What could I do to try to stay as connected to her as possible? So I came up with the idea that every Sunday, I would record a 5-minute episode about the kind of topics we might normally talk about. Send it to her Monday morning, and then she could watch it on her way to campus. I thought it'd be a good idea to resurrect that. They'll be the kinds of topics that I would talk to my now 25-year-old daughter, or the younger version of myself, or people that I mentor, or maybe you. Hey everybody, welcome to Coffee with Podge, the second episode. So here we are in January, and I think a lot of people are doing dry January and not drinking for the month of January. And I thought it might be a good opportunity to talk about my own journey with alcohol and kind of my view on it, because I think it actually is important for a whole bunch of reasons, some that are obvious and some that aren't. So just to give my background, when I was 9, my mom, who I didn't realize it at the time was an alcoholic, was basically going through detox and was incredibly sick. My dad was working all the time. My older brother really wasn't around much. So I was the one kind of nursing her back to health. And it really freaked me out because she was deathly sick. And it wasn't until a couple years later that I came to understand that was her withdrawing from alcohol. It freaked me out so much that I just swore to myself I was never going to drink alcohol. So peer pressure started happening a few years later, 13, 14, 15. I was so freaked out, there was no amount of peer pressure that was going to get me to drink. And I never really drank alcohol until I was 35 years old when I got divorced, which I'll come to in a minute. But all through high school, I was the vice president of Students Against Drunk Driving the cool kids home from the parties I wasn't invited to, because if you're not drinking, you're definitely not the cool kid. All through college, all through business school. I mean, not even a sip of champagne at midnight on New Year's. It wasn't until I got divorced when I was 35 and started to date again. I'd go on a date with a woman, and she'd order a glass of wine, and when I wouldn't order something, she'd be like, "Why aren't you drinking? Are you an alcoholic?" So ironically, I started to, order drinks and drink socially as a way to just prove that I wasn't an alcoholic. And I was, again, just a social drinker, wouldn't drink that often, but definitely would drink at business occasions, holidays, parties, New Year's Eve, things like that. Even occasionally got a little drunk, and quite frankly enjoyed the experience. I can understand as social lubricant how alcohol can be helpful. I don't really have that hard of a time socializing, but it helps. And there's also that celebratory aspect to it that frankly it's easy to miss. And it's not necessarily the physical withdrawal, but the social withdrawal of it that can be a bit of a pain. It was about 8 months ago that really more for just health and fitness, I was getting myself back in really good shape. And obviously the empty calories of alcoholic drinks are not your friend when it comes to getting healthy and fit. And so really having no other reason than from a pure physical health standpoint that I decide, just for a little while till I get myself back to my fighting weight, I'm not going to drink alcohol. And I was absolutely shocked by how much it improved my mental acuity. I felt like my IQ went up 20 points. And because it had been so long, honestly, over 20 years since I'd been completely alcohol free for, more than say a few weeks or a month, it really shocked me at how big of an impact it had. The other thing that I think that's easy to lose sight of is kind of how you interact with other people and who you interact with. If a bunch of your friends, whenever they get together, they're always drinking, and let's be honest, right? No one's judgment improves after a few drinks. Best case scenario, it stays basically the same. But for most people, after 2 or 3 drinks, your judgment, there's a reason they call it beer goggles. There's a reason why, most people's really bad decisions are made after too many cocktails. So there's a social reason. I think that people really underestimate how much the frequency and amount that you drink impacts the people that you spend your time with. And the people you spend your time with are the single biggest factor in whether you're moving yourself and your life forward or staying stagnant or even going backwards. And they always say that it sounds like a cliche, but like a lot of cliches, it's mostly true. You are mostly like the 5 people you spend the most time with. And if the 5 people you spend the most time with are getting hammered and partying all the time, you're gonna get a very different trajectory of your life than if the 5 people you're hanging out with are super focused and disciplined and really trying to move their life forward every way they can. I will say that because I do miss the social aspect of drinking, I've sort of tried to think about different ways to approach it. Because it's hard when you're in a social setting. Like if you're in a social setting and people are like, hey, have a drink, and you never drink, that's the easiest because you can just be like, I don't drink. And most people are not gonna, especially in this day and age, most people are not gonna forcefully be like, have a drink, have a drink. Some people will, but those are people that usually have big problems of their own when it comes to alcohol. But another approach that I'm gonna try this year, I don't know how it's gonna work, is I've allocated 6 days, 6 times a year, so 1 time every other month, that I'm gonna allow myself to have a few drinks. Never getting drunk, any of that, but even having, 3 or 4, drinks over, a couple hour period of time, whether it's for celebratory reasons, maybe I save one for New Year's, my daughter's birthday, my birthday, a big holiday party, something like that, as a way to, because then you actually get to use those 6 days almost as currency, as a way to demonstrate to someone how important they are to you, or because they know you're using one of your very sacred 6 days a year of drinking. You could use, you can use 12 days a year, you could ever. I even heard one guy, he had a really interesting approach. What he did was he would basically have 1 month of the entire year, and that was the only month, and he would basically drink constantly that whole month, and then the other 11 months of the year not drink at all. Not necessarily think that's the best way to go, but there's a bunch of ways to do it. Everyone should find their own way. But what I would say is really think about alcohol and the effect it's having on your life, because it really is sort of this very subtle undermining of your life. It affects your sleep, it affects your focus, it affects your physical fitness, it affects everything. And again, even things like just basic memory recall and how quickly I could solve problems, even how I felt emotionally, I felt much more even keel being alcohol free. We'll see how it works one day every other 2 months. I did have a very close friend of mine going through a really, really challenging professional situation. And I chose, and he was aware of this, and I chose to use one of my 6 days just a couple days ago. Just had a few drinks, didn't get drunk or anything like that. But it was, but we'll see. So far, so good. Anyway, so that was my second Coffee with Podge episode. Alcohol, be really careful, really think about it. Alcohol, not your friend. Anyway, don't want to sound too preachy or any of that, but just want to share my experience. And I hope you enjoyed the second episode of Coffee with Podge. Hope to see you next week.